Hi guys, so let's now take a look at the J-curve and the Marshall-Lerner condition. So when it comes to the J-curve and the Marshall-Lerner, it really helps to understand that a currency depreciation is likely to actually cause a worsening in the actual trade balance here. And you can see I've put the definition out here, before actually leading to an improvement in the overall trade balance. Now, why would that be the case? Why would our trade balance, where we've got our deficit, our surplus, we're currently running a deficit, why would it worsen after a currency depreciation? Because of course you have WIDEC really taking effect here. Weak pound, imports dear, exports cheap. So your exports would become cheaper, your imports would become dearer. So why would it worsen? Okay, well, it's all to do with the actual elasticities. The elasticities of demand for exports and the elasticities of demand for imports. So for the Marshall-Lerner condition to actually be upheld, it will require the long-run elasticities of imports and exports to be greater than 1. Okay, so it will require the imports and the exports sum total of elasticities to be greater than 1. That's really important. So let's consider our example as we are in point A here, where we are currently running a deficit. Okay, now we can see that we've got a price for exports in a very simple model and a quantity of exports being demanded of 10, and we therefore have a total revenue earned for our export industry of 150. Meanwhile, the price of imports is 10. The quantity of imports demanded, however, is 20. So that leads to a revenue generated for imports of 200. So that, of course, is a withdrawal from our circular flow of income, and that is a negative on our trade balance. Okay, so overall we can see we've got 150 coming in, 200 going out, and therefore we are left with a minus 50 trade deficit situation. Okay, so as we actually undertake a depreciation, how would this be attained? Well, it could be via quantitative easing. It could then increase the money supply. By increasing the money supply, of course, it weakens the actual strength of the pound. And so then the currency would then depreciate. And what would happen in such a scenario? Well, firstly, when it comes to the price of exports, the price of exports in foreign markets might go down to 10 perhaps. Okay. Meanwhile, the actual quantity demanded of those exports might rise to perhaps 212. Okay, and we might then see total revenue being generated of 120 now. Okay, so we can see that there's been a small increase in the actual quantity demanded, but there's been a big fall in the price in the international markets there. Okay, meanwhile, the price of imports, where it was 10, okay, now what we might see in this circumstance is, of course, that we are now having to pay 15, but yet we are still importing perhaps 20 units of that good. Okay, so therefore we can see that based upon this level of output, we are therefore actually going to be paying out 300 in terms of the actual total revenue generated by those imports. So now we've got 120 to 300. So we have a scenario, of course, playing through here where we have a trade deficit of minus 180. So it's worsened quite considerably here. Okay, now that's significant, and the reason this may happen, the reason we may see relative inelasticity, i.e. the fact that quantity demanded hasn't increased much for our exports despite that price fall, that quite considerable price fall of a third. The reason we don't see much change there is due to inelastic demand for exports in the short run, and this is going to be down to time lag effects. Okay, time lag effects that it takes time for people to react and respond and change their buying habits. Okay, it takes businesses time to actually change contracts around and actually adjust their purchases and seek out cheaper, more competitive suppliers. Okay, so as such, immediately after the depreciation and in the short run, we can therefore expect things to actually get worse. And we can see for businesses, perhaps they are committed to actually importing 20 units because they've already put that contract through that they will require 20 as a level of imports at some point in the future, and they then need to honour that commitment despite the higher price, and we can see an increased amount of money flowing out of the economy. Okay, so there we are. Now the question is, what happens in the longer term, really? Now, of course, in the long run, contracts will expire. Domestic firms may actually set up and re-enter the marketplace, and as such we might actually benefit in the longer term from our improved price competitiveness. So if we just consider now that actually we still have that price of 10, but actually demand has responded to that lower price pound, and now we can see, well, there's a big improvement in our actual income that is being earned through our exports. Meanwhile, the price of imports remains at 15, okay, but perhaps now what's actually happened is we actually see a big reduction in the actual purchases of imports that are being undertaken, and as such we could see 150 as the actual revenue or money leaving our economy. Okay, so as such we can see we are now positive 150, okay, because we have 300 minus that 150, so we would now be at point C, and at point C, we're in the long run, the contracts have expired, the domestic firms have set up or re-entered the market, and perhaps businesses and consumers in the domestic economy have adjusted to actually buy more domestically produced because they're more price competitive, and thus we reach point C here because the Lerner-Marshall condition, or Marshall-Lerner condition rather, is actually upheld. So the sum total of the elasticities of demand for exports and imports here now is greater than 1. Previously it was less than 1. Okay, so there we go, guys. That's nice and straightforward. Of course, there are a number of factors that this could depend upon. How easily, for instance, could domestic firms actually set up and compete with those foreign manufacturers? Is that actually plausible? Because in practice it doesn't tend to work through to the same extent as we see here, and certainly it hasn't necessarily played out after the 2016 depreciation of the pound sterling following the Brexit referendum. We haven't seen a big increase in our current account position as a result of exporting so many more goods. Okay, interesting stuff, hey? Right, thanks guys, see you next time.